Picture a middle school science classroom. Two students are standing next to a papier-mâché volcano they built together. But when the teacher walks over to grade the project, one student steps right in front of the other, eagerly claiming all the credit. Pride is that quiet voice insisting we are better than those around us. This urge stems from a deep fear that if we aren't the best, we're worthless. But through God's eyes, that pressure fades. We are valuable simply because He made us. This week's Sabbath School lesson explores this daily tension. Over the next few minutes, we're going to track how pride slowly builds a thick wall between us and God, and how choosing humility can tear that wall right down. It is very easy to spot an inflated ego in a local politician, a famous celebrity, or a smug coworker. It is much harder to look in the mirror. But if we only point fingers at others, we fall into a trap, allowing unacknowledged pride to quietly ruin our own closest relationships. First, we need to separate healthy self-worth from toxic pride. Being happy that you studied hard and aced a test is perfectly fine. Pride becomes a problem when we start believing we achieved everything completely on our own, stopping along the way to take all the credit, and forgetting to thank God for the abilities He gave us. That shift actually started long before humans existed. It began with an angel named Lucifer. He stood in the immediate, beautiful presence of God, but he allowed a quiet selfishness to creep into his heart, turning his back on his Creator to focus entirely on his own importance. In Monday's lesson, Jesus highlights what this looks like in everyday life. He tells a story about a highly respected religious leader who walks to the very front of the church, stands where everyone can see him, and prays loudly, listing off all the reasons he is such a remarkably good person. Jesus contrasts him with a second man, an outcast who stays in the very back of the church. This man feels the weight of his own mistakes. He doesn't make a speech. He drops to his knees, eyes blurry with tears, and simply whispers for God's mercy. Jesus explained that God rejected the bragging leader's prayer, but warmly accepted the humble man. Getting completely honest about our flaws, without trying to hide them behind our accomplishments, is the only way God can truly reach us. Tuesday's lesson looks at a man who had every earthly reason to be proud. Moses grew up in the grand halls of an Egyptian palace. Unmatched wealth, education, and absolute authority sat right at his fingertips. Yet Moses walked away from all that status to follow God. He spent 40 years in the quiet desert, losing his self-sufficiency. By giving up his high rank and trusting God to lead the way, Moses eventually became known as the most humble man on earth. Dropping the desire to be the best is a struggle. In Wednesday's lesson, we see that even Jesus' closest friends face this. After years watching Jesus heal and serve, the disciples still sat around a campfire, arguing over who was the most important. This focus on ourselves creates a dangerous blind spot. When we are obsessed with proving our importance, we lose the ability to see our own weaknesses or admit when we're wrong. Unchecked pride convinces us we've got it all under control. It traps us in a cycle of self-reliance, and it stops us from asking God for the help we actually need. So, how do we actually fix this? Thursday's lesson offers a practical solution. To break the habit of pride, we have to stop looking at ourselves and look directly at Jesus. Think about who He was. Jesus had the authority to demand the highest seat at any table. Instead, He spent days feeding crowds, listening to outcasts, and quietly washing the dusty feet of His followers. He chose to be a servant. When we look at the choices He made, our own efforts to look important start to seem small. The gap between His perfection and our own reality becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't an instant fix. It's a slow realization that comes from spending time with Him. The more we focus on who He is, the less we feel the need to constantly talk about ourselves. As Friday's reading wraps up the week, the contrast is clear. Pride acts like a heavy roadblock. It deceives us into thinking we don't need God or anyone else, leaving us isolated behind a wall of our own making. Humility clears that path. It removes the pressure to perform and reminds us that we are simply loved people who need a savior. Heaven doesn't place value on rank, wealth, or who can shout the loudest. It values the trusting, simple nature of a child, not someone constantly trying to prove they are the boss. Take a quiet moment right now to honestly ask yourself, when was the last time you paraded your own goodness? And what might you need to change in your life to walk closer with God? Write down your thoughts and bring them with you to Sabbath school, because the moment we choose to tear down our own pride is the moment we take the first real step toward experiencing God's grace.